Well, good evening. Welcome to a People for Effective Government online event. We are glad to have you. My name is Jeff Williams, and I will be helped out by, is that Chris? Then another PEG board member. He will co-moderate and help with collecting questions. PEG is a nonprofit, Spokane-based nonpartisan coalition. Our mission is to support bipartisan approaches to governing, which are fiscally responsible, ensure an adequate social safety net, and promote a civil society. We've been holding in-person forums and online events for over 3 years. For those who are new to our events, we look forward to having you with us in the future. We are committed to changing the current political climate in which our two major parties have become increasingly polarized. We are working to encourage sincere and civil debate about the challenges that our country and nation faces and about effective solutions to those challenges by providing speakers with information and perspectives on a variety of relevant topics. We are a small grassroots organization working with very shallow pockets. If you are finding these events helpful as you think about issues at the local, state, and federal level, please consider joining as a member or making a donation to PEG. We are a nonprofit, again, relying on membership dues and donations to cover our costs. If you are interested in learning more about PEG and possibly becoming a member, please visit our website at www.pegnow.org. During tonight's presentation, audience members are welcome to submit questions at any time. Our speakers will answer as many questions as possible before we end the forum, usually around 8:30. Please be brief. You can ask several questions, but please submit only one question at a time and use the QA feature in Zoom. This event is being recorded and will be posted on our website, www.pegnow.org, within a couple of weeks. And with that said, let me introduce our speakers for today. First, we have Margaret Hinson. She is the site director for IRC Washington's New Spokane office. Margaret brings over a decade of experience in refugee resettlement services to her role with IRC. Prior to joining IRC, Margaret worked for the City of Spokane's Community Housing and Human Services Department, where she managed a $40 million portfolio of federal funds for housing stability and homeless services. Welcome, Margaret. Kimmy Curry is the Community Engagement Coordinator for IRC Spokane. She spent 5 years as a volunteer host family, sharing her home with newly arrived refugees from around the world until they were able to find permanent housing in Spokane. In the fall of 2021, Kimmy spent 6 weeks volunteering for IRC at Fort Bliss during the Afghan evacuation and began working in their Spokane office in February 2022. Hello and welcome, Kimmy. We will start tonight with our speakers giving a presentation, and we will then move into questions and go as long as it makes sense. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret. Again, welcome, Margaret.
Thank you. So I'm actually going to start us off. And
oh, Kimberly is.
That's okay, no problem.
Sorry.
So no problem. We are going to go through a little presentation. We call it Refugee 101. We're just going to give you some information about the global refugee perspective and refugee resettlement within the United States. So we'll get started. The IRC stands for the International Rescue Committee, was originally organized by a coalition of artists, politicians, and intellectuals, including Albert Einstein. And the mission was to aid Jewish refugees who were fleeing persecution and violence during the early years of the Holocaust. The IRC continues on this mission today to help people affected by humanitarian crisis to survive, recover, and rebuild their lives. Next slide. The IRC operates in 40 countries worldwide. Our work covers the entire arc of the displacement crisis, from countries where war and disaster are taking place, like in Afghanistan, to the countries where refugees flee to, such as Turkey, Venezuela, and Yemen. And on to the countries where families seek asylum, as well as the countries where refugees are resettled, like our work here in the United States. Next slide. So now we are going to talk about who are refugees, where do they come from, and how do refugees reach the United States? So a refugee is a person who is outside of his or her country of origin and is unable or unwilling to return because of persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution. The grounds to qualify for refugee status are based on race, religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion. Currently, worldwide, there are 103 million displaced persons, and conflict and disaster continue to expel vulnerable populations from their homes each year, with the need is quickly surpassing the response. Of the 103 million individuals, 32.5 million are refugees. And out of that number, only 1% of that 32 million will ever be considered for permanent resettlement. So that leaves 99% of refugees forced to reside in camps for decades or internally or displaced in host communities indefinitely with limited rights and resources. Next slide. So here we have some global trends. We see that 72% of refugees originate from these 5 countries, Syria, Venezuela, Ukraine, Afghanistan, and Sudan. And here we see that nearly half of all refugees displaced across borders are hosted by these 5 countries, Turkey, Colombia, Germany, Pakistan, and Uganda. Many of which countries are low to middle income themselves and who are taking on much of this responsibility. Next slide. So here we have 3 durable solutions to the refugee crisis. The first is voluntary repatriation, which is the return of refugees to their home country of their own free will once the conditions have become safe and they have a guarantee of protection from their government. The second is local integration, where refugees seek to attain rights similar to those enjoyed by the citizens of that country where they have sought refuge. And then finally is third country resettlement, which is a lot of what we do here in IRC Spokane, where refugees are allowed to permanently and safely resettle in a country other than their origin or their host country. And that is a lot of our work, bringing refugees to our community in Spokane and assisting them with everything they need to rebuild their lives here. Next slide. And here we'll just briefly touch on the difference between a refugee and an asylee. So refugee status is determined by the UNHCR, that's the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and that status is determined and granted overseas. So the process is all completed abroad and they are given the legal permissions to enter the third party country all overseas. That happens. And then an asylee comes to the new country through a port of entry and they request asylum. So it is also a legal pathway, but all the determinations are made once they arrive. Next slide. And humanitarian parole is another legal pathway into the United States issued for urgent humanitarian reasons. So it is a temporary protected status, which is usually granted for up to 2 years. However, there is no pathway through this status to a permanent immigration. And you may have heard more about this status recently with the Afghan evacuation and the crisis in Ukraine. This is how those individuals entered the country. Next slide. And here we have the process that refugees go through to resettle in the United States. So first, their refugee status is determined by the UNHCR, and then they are given a referral. They're then connected with a resettlement support center who will help them through all of the process overseas. they go through an extensive security screening and background check process. And that involves like the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State, the intelligence community, the FBI. And so those security screenings happen before they enter the United States. Refugees are some of the most background checked individuals that you will ever meet. So that all happens on the other end. And then there are USCIS in-person interviews. They interview the family and people who know the family and get the whole picture. And then that is followed by medical screenings and vaccinations and all of the medical clearances that they need before they can enter. And then they have a cultural orientation overseas to make sure that they understand our culture, what the laws and everything they are agreeing to come here. And then they are matched with a resettlement agency. So that first part of the process is where it takes a pretty long time. It can take 18 months, at which 18 to 36 months would be pretty quick. And that's what the average is, kind of what they go for. But it can also take much longer with some of these background checks and security screenings and interviews taking place, and then things slowing down depending on a whole lot of other variables, and then the clearance is expiring or the legal status expiring, so then they have to start the process over. So it can, even though 18 to 36 months is sometimes the average, it can take decades. So once they are matched with a resettlement agency, then it kind of starts to speed up a little bit. And so they would be matched with one of the 10 national resettlement organizations. In Spokane, there's IRC and World Relief. And once we assure their case and agree to take them, then travel arrangements are made through IOM, the International Office of Migration. And once that happens, their travel is booked. We usually know 1 to 2 weeks in advance before they'll be arriving. And then we can try to start getting things moving on our end, trying to secure housing and other things. And then from there, they are admitted into the United States. And that's when our big process starts, our resettlement process. And Margaret will speak more to that.
Thanks, Kimmy. And I'll just add that the hardest way to enter the U.S. is as a refugee because of all of this screening and vetting that Kimmy discussed. So it's definitely it's not true, what you often hear in the news that they're just letting anybody in. This is a very, very secure and highly screened process. So Kimmy gave a little bit of the overview of who a refugee is and how they get to the U.S. And so I'm going to talk about what happens once they get here. So that the formal program is called the Reception and Placement Program. There are, as Kimmy alluded to, there's just 10. There were 9, and this year is the first year we've added a new one in decades. So there's 10 national refugee resettlement agencies that have a cooperative agreement, a formal contract with the State Department to resettle refugees. This is the only way refugees are coming into the country is through one of these 10 organizations. And Kimmy also mentioned that here in Spokane, we have 2. So there's World Relief, who's been operating for decades, and then there is the IRC. And we just opened up about a year ago. And so now we work closely with World Relief to resettle refugees in Spokane. So each of those 10 agencies has a network across the country of field offices that will do the actual reception and placement services. So we have our headquarters for IRC where they operate out of New York. And so they will get referred cases from the State Department and then spread them out across the country, across their field office network. And there's a lot of considerations that go into where they would send a case. They look at whether there are already relationships that in that local community, a family member or a friend. And if so, then that is the first choice, the first place to send a refugee case. Otherwise, they're looking at the local community characteristics. Uh, are there existing populations for that? Is there an Iraqi community already in Spokane, or a Burmese community? And so there would be other there would be a nice community to support this case. They look at language capacity, if there's any particular medical needs. Is this a place that a community that can serve and meet those needs? We also consider housing, of course. Can we find can we house a family of 12? Can we find a 4 or 5 bedroom apartment or a house to accommodate a large family? And then vice versa, can we take single individuals? Can we would they be able to afford the rent for a studio or 1 bedroom? Or are we able to match them up with other singles in the community? So this is it's a real give and take between the local office. So us here in Spokane, we're frequently communicating with our HQ about what's happening on the ground, and whether we can take that case or can't take that case. But generally we have provided annually. We provide a very specific demographics and characteristics of the community about who would who we think would be a successful case here. And so our HQ knows relatively reasonably like what kind of case to send to us. And so most of the time we are accepting the case. There are times where we have that leeway to push back or say that it's not a good time, or that we just don't think that case will do well here. We think they'll do better in Denver for whatever reason. And part of this consultation is not just this line to our HQ. It's also locally with our stakeholders. We are required by our contract with the government to hold quarterly consultations with public health, so the local public health, Spokane Regional Health District, CHAS, Unify, anybody who'd be serving our clients. We communicate regularly with the school district, the public schools, Spokane Public School District, keep them abreast of what of who to expect, what students that they could see in the schools. We also consult with the local city government, the administration, the city council, and the police department, as well as the public benefits office, Social Security, DSHS, welfare programs that our clients are initially entitled to participate in. So I mentioned we have a formal contract with the State Department, and it's to provide very specific, what we call core services for each case we have. And it starts pre-arrival. As Kim, you mentioned, we'll get notification of a case, cases travel, usually 2 weeks in advance. Sometimes it's much shorter. Sometimes we have a month. And so we immediately start looking for housing. You can imagine with the housing market here in Spokane, it's not easy to find cheap and available apartments. So we that's the first thing we do is really start looking for housing. Once we have got the case, we, in addition to the housing and some of the other prep work, we do the airport pickup. We're there greeting them and then transporting them either to that to the permanent housing maybe we were lucky enough to secure, or to a temporary Airbnb, a hotel that they'll stay at temporarily until the permanent housing is available. We're immediately enrolling, registering with Social Security, with the government authorities. They're entitled to foods, the food program, and sometimes they're eligible for the cash and medical coverage that any low income people are allowed to are eligible for. We're enrolling the parents in ESL if they need it. We are enrolling the kids in school. we sign them up for civil service. Any of the males under 26 are required to sign up for civil service. And then we're connecting them with the health system. So we are establishing primary care and then taking them to their medical appointments, helping them understand how to access. We are doing a lot of cultural orientation. This is probably where we spend the most time, is introducing the American systems, the transportation system. So how to ride the bus, how to read a bus schedule and understand the routes. We're literally on the bus with them and making sure they know how to get from their home to kind of the key locations in the community. We're referring them to employment programs. So where they'll get help finding that first job, prepping to find a job, and then getting that job, and then they'll also get help to retain the job. And that's typically in-house. We have an employment program in-house that we enroll most of our clients into. Oh, and sorry, I'm back to the cultural orientation and all those American systems. I mentioned the transportation system. I think I had mentioned before the healthcare system, helping them understand insurance and how to access care for themselves or for their family members. There's the financial system. So we are doing a lot of financial literacy, budgeting. That's really one of the most important pieces of information that we share with them, because the expectation for refugees in the U.S. refugee program is that they are financially self-sufficient within 30 to 90 days after arrival. That's how long this program is, and really that's the length of the program. So I have more to say on that like that term, but yeah, needless to say, we spend a lot of time on budgeting because the money is extremely tight, and they have to be so careful from the very beginning. We also do a lot of education on the school system, so they understand, where their kids are going and how to be engaged with teachers, and then also the personal and public safety. There's depending where they're from, our clients are from. There's some really big. It's very different in terms of how, for example, we watch our children. In many countries, there's this kind of communal attitude that somebody will be watching your kids, and here, people need to keep an eye on their kids. If a neighbor sees that a kid's out at the playground by themselves, they'll call the cops. So we have to we do a lot around that the personal safety. We do a lot of work with the police department so that our clients understand who the police are and how they can help. Many of our clients come from governments or come from countries where the government persecuted them, and so they have a fear of authority. So there's a lot of work and familiarization that we do with the local police department. And then there's just a lot of social norms too. Some cultures, it's like spitting in public is okay, or not making eye contact, and the handshaking. Those are some practices that we work on with our clients. So there's a ton of education in this very short time frame. A lot of information coming at clients at refugees in those first 90 days. And I touched on this. This is basically it. This is what the U.S. refugee program is 90 days in this like very specific checklist of services that we complete. It's a lot of referral to other organizations, and the expectation is that refugees, that the clients, that they should be able to then be on their feet and be self-sufficient. And it's totally unrealistic. It does not, even for the most sophisticated of our clients. We have Iraqi engineers and government ministers from Afghanistan, and it's a real it's a real struggle. They're coming here with significant trauma, and so just the expectation of what they must absorb and do and take on in those early days, in those early months is it's really unrealistic. And the program itself, the idea of the U.S. refugee program is that it is this really beautiful public-private partnership, and so we are expected to leverage the community and have volunteers and donors who take on a lot of the integration and support pieces, and we do for the most part. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's a real thin program. It's a lot. It's definitely unique compared to other resettlement countries and what they offer refugees. And so what's happened, most of the resettlement agencies in the U.S. have had to develop additional programming to supplement, to support clients past those first initial 90 days. And so most of us have additional programs that we've expanded, case management to help people with any kind of medical issues. If people are manifesting, behaviors like traumatic behaviors and seem to be decompensating, we have developed programs where we can step in and help them, and we have really nice relationships with some of the local counselors, counseling programs in town. So we've really built out our programming to compensate for a lot of the gaps in the resettlement program, the U.S. program. So again, we have kind of extended case management supports. We've developed youth programming, youth tutoring, youth mentoring, parent engagement programs that we will serve folks after the 90 days up until 5 years. We have legal services, citizenship classes. We've expanded our employment programming so that when after that, after refugees have been given or taken on that first job, that first entry level position, they can come back to us when they're a little bit more stable, and we can help them get a better job and kind of keep laddering up, depending on what their skill set is and their language abilities. So we have a lot of programs beyond the resettlement program, and really it's from kind of the initial airport arrival through citizenship. So kind of 5 years is the timeline that we typically are working with clients. Kind of the key moments as they adjust their status and get green cards, or come back for that job. They're looking at their kids graduating and kind of what's the next step after high school, etc. So it's really beyond. The idea is the resettlement program is at 90 days, but we have built out services and to serve folks until they do become U.S. citizens. I've hit on a few of the challenges that refugees experience and some of the gaps in resettlement. So this is just a little bit more detail. A lot of these might look familiar to people. There are challenges that I think a lot of U.S. born non-refugee families and individuals also experience, like childcare. The ones that are specific to refugees, I think you can pick out in terms of just that acculturation, understanding like the social norms and learning a new language. One big area is that the social isolation. and the separation from family and friends, and the stress of not knowing if they will see their family and friends again, if they'll be able to come to the US as well. And then also being able to cope with the past trauma. So then we wanted to just share a little bit of some just numbers and some population information of what's happening here in Spokane. And we mentioned that it's World Relief and IRC who are resettling. Collectively, I think so. We operate in the federal fiscal year, so that's October 1 to September 30th. So we're currently in federal fiscal year 23, and which started October 1, 2022. So since then, between World Relief and IRC, we've resettled 248 refugees into the Spokane area. And you can see that the top populations that we've resettled are from Syria, the Congo, Vietnam, and Ukraine, as well as Afghanistan, and then much smaller numbers of other populations. We're scheduled for this federal fiscal year 23, which again will end September 30th. We're scheduled to resettle, I think it's 700 between the two agencies. So we still have a long way to go. We're expecting a real surge in these last few months of the federal fiscal year. Great. And so just wanted to touch on a few ways if anyone is interested in getting involved or learning how they can help. Of course, you're welcome to volunteer. We have lots of opportunities to volunteer, whether it's helping set up a new home, actually moving the furniture and putting the household items into the apartments, donating household items, donating money. We also there's some really new and exciting opportunities to actually sponsor refugees and share in those core services with us. And then of course there's advocacy that can be done, and we didn't talk too much about the Ukrainians or the Afghan humanitarian parolees, but they're a major population we're serving right now, not through the typical resettlement program, but so they are here in Spokane in large numbers. And one of the challenges is that they have this temporary status, so that parole status, and so they are having to figure out how to adjust their status to a more permanent status that would allow them to stay in the U.S. past the 2 years that they have been granted. So one of the ways is to claim asylum, file for asylum, but that is a extremely slow, backlogged process, and so many of the Afghans who came as parolees are going to be in limbo and kind of stuck in the system and might lose their authorization to work, and so there's an Afghan Adjustment Act that Congress has been introduced and there's efforts to get it passed. It's failed. I think at the end of last year, it didn't make it through, and so there's we'd love support to kind of push this through, so that there is a permanent pathway for the Afghans. And then similarly for the Ukrainians, they too have a parole status. There is currently no any congressional act that's to help them adjust, but we think there will be. So we appreciate you keeping your eyes open for that, and supporting immigration options for them, so that they aren't also in limbo and unable to stay in the country and continue to work and be safe. So I think that concludes our portion, and we'd love to open it up and answer questions, um, and have a discussion with you all.
All right, great. Thank you. I got a handful of questions, so I'll start. You've basically cleared a handful of them up, but Vietnam did not see that coming. What is prompting the influx from Vietnam?
Yeah, this is really interesting and very unique to Spokane. So the Vietnamese are Amerasians is the immigration term. They are U.S. citizens. They're children of U.S. citizens. So um, the U.S. soldiers who fought in Vietnam.
Right.
Um, so it's so they are entitled if they can prove their relationship and they do DNA tests, etc. They will receive visas and have a pathway to become citizens in the U.S.
I see. Okay.
And they're coming to Spokane because there's an organization here. There's a gentleman who is an Amerasian himself who has formed an organization to help sponsor them and help them understand how to access the program.
And if
Okay.
you're
All right. So that's a unique.
if you're interested, the
Go
KHQ
ahead.
did a great story with IRC and a recent Amerasian arrival, who was reunited with her father. I think she's in her 50s and he's in his 70s. So it was a pretty
Wow.
exciting reunion. If you just Google it, it'll come right up.
Okay.
Margaret, do
Cool.
you want to end screen sharing?
Sure. Yeah.
We can. Good. I have a question. When we originally looked at all of the countries that take refugees and saw the top 5 and saw the U.S. wasn't anywhere near, where are we in terms of that list, and how many refugees does the U.S. Take each year?
Well, we're that was the slides were about who's hosting kind of those initial the folks who are initially displaced. So those are not refugees that are being offered a permanent residency in those countries. So we historically have been the largest resettlement country, taking in the most, on average 90,000 refugees a year. After that, this is the Trump administration. So after the U.S. and Canada was the next largest resettlement country, and they would take typically 12,000 a year. So we are significantly larger in terms of the numbers of refugees we take. Currently there's a presidential determination annually. There's a presidential determination where the U.S. president decides how many refugees to take each year. This year it's been set at 125,000, which would be the highest number in the history of the program. But we are nowhere near reaching that goal. I think as of March, the end of March, we're at 20,000, and so it's very unlikely we'll get anywhere near that. But that's where the ceiling was set this year, and we expect it to be somewhere close next year as well.
Well, the
Is
process
that because of the
doesn't
length
have
of the process or the complexity of the process? Why are we not reaching the limit?
It's multifold. It's one, the refugee resettlement program, the processing, the overseas components was like totally decimated during the Trump administration. So they're having to rebuild those pieces, those screening pieces, all the kind of the stuff that happens overseas, and even here to kind of the determinations, as well as just a lot of people were shifted over to the asylum pro. Some of those really basic logistical pieces. Then the Afghan evacuation that's Ukraine. I guess it's most recently the Ukrainian crisis was like a real that was a real surprise, and so a lot of resources were shifted to support the Ukrainians and build out that United for Ukraine program. So there's been a couple crises that have kind of gotten in the way of best laid plans.
All right. So I saw in that screening there's the Homeland Security, Department of Defense, FBI, Intelligence Community, Department of State, and I don't know, there was some other one. And when I see Homeland Security, Department of Defense, FBI, and Intelligence Community, I'm like, well, what's the difference? And is there like material differences, or is this sort of just a political thing?
I mean, I think they're that siloed. I think
yeah, okay.
I think that's like the uncomfortable truth there.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, when I saw that, I'm just like, well, this is ridiculous. I mean, okay.
Yeah.
Whatever. All right. So that was kind of a one-off question, that, yeah, whatever. So there's I know there's upsides to refugees, and I want to ask you that. So we'll give you that. And I also want to find out if there are any downsides to taking refugees. But foremost in this topic, what are the upsides for us? Being selfish for us, what are the upsides?
I mean, I could answer both your questions and just tell you it's all upsides. I mean, and like really, we're talking like such a small. This is a really small number of people that we're talking about.
Yes.
The U.S. I think the immigration U.S. immigration system, I think, takes in like a million people a year. You know, and this is like such a fraction. 100,000 people. I mean, they're bringing the culture. So enriching our communities. They're bringing. I mean, they're here because they want to take advantage of all the opportunities. That all the beautiful things that make the U.S. An amazing place, democracy, the ability to just like freedom, and I mean all the corny stuff, right? It's education for their kids, education for their daughters, right? They're coming from countries, most of them, where their daughters are not allowed to go to school. So and just also just really practically speaking, I mean, they're taking jobs that a lot of Americans don't want. We have we don't have enough workers. You know, these are the people who are going to be taking care of our seniors, right? And working in our hospitals, and they gladly will do it. And so I don't know, Kim, if you wanted to add anything, but it's all up for me.
Yeah, I would totally echo that. From on a personal level, I mean, I've met and shared my home with hundreds of refugees over the years, and know them personally, and all of the great things they've added to my life. But just from a total practical standpoint, all studies have shown that there's an overall economic gain associated with refugee resettlement, and that they ultimately end up paying far more taxes than they cost the government. They create jobs through small businesses and entrepreneurship, like Margaret said, filling labor gaps, replacing an aging workforce, creating jobs. So there are plenty of practical reasons, than just on a personal level. They just bring such a great perspective, great talents, great culture. I can honestly, genuinely say I've learned much more and gained much more from them than they have from me. So
yeah, someone should do a marketing graphic on here's how much it costs for us to get a refugee, and here's what it returns. So $1 invested throws off 2 or 3. You know, that would be an interesting thing to see, to help people better understand everything you've said, which, you know, makes perfect sense. So anyway, Chris, do you have anything? Another question?
I know for the average family in Spokane, it's hard to get by. Low-income people have a really hard time. How do refugee families manage financially? Is there outside support that comes to them, or is guaranteed to them as they come in, or do you have to raise it all? How do they make it work? How do they make ends meet?
I mean, it's patchwork. It's really patchwork. And so there are some financial assistance programs that can help with some initial expenses. Refugees. So the agency has. Resettlement agencies have $1,200 per capita to spend, so per person, to get a family kind of up and running, and we have a very specific list of household items that have to be in the apartment, and requirements of what kind of apartment we can get, but it's all market we're not getting subsidized housing. There's no Section 8. They're not eligible for that at this point. So it's what the market is willing to, what the rents are. And so they have to get jobs right away. They have to get jobs right away, whether they speak English, whether they're ready to or not. And so that's what they do. That's what they have to do. So they're getting jobs. There's a little bit of financial, maybe they have like a month's rent kind of cushion. But they're hustling. Yeah, I don't know, Kimmy, do you want to add anything to that?
I'll just put in a plug for we need help. Everything that individuals donate in kind saves money on the back end of us not having to purchase those items with their resettlement funds. And so when people donate gently used items or even cash is especially helpful because there are some things that we can't give them used, like beds. And so we'd have to use their resettlement money to purchase that. And so when we can get donations from community or from from corporate support or any kind of partnership, will go such a long way in helping them become self-sufficient, because we're starting them off on the right foot by letting them save as much on the front end.
And a fun fact that I didn't mention earlier is that refugees are required to pay back their airplane tickets. So it's
Wow.
within, yes, they enter the country in debt. They have about a 6-month window before they get that first bill, and there's payment plans, so they can do $10 a month if that's what they can afford, but they have to pay back their airplane tickets.
Wow.
Yeah, most people don't know that. Bootstrap.
How
Bootstrap.
about languages? How many languages do you have to work in to, it looks like you got a pretty wide global dispersion of people. There must be a lot of languages.
Yeah, and we hire from the communities that we serve. So we have folks on staff who do speak the languages of the primary populations we're serving, and then we have language lines. So we have a phone a company we use to call and do over the phone interpretation. For critical meetings, we have in-person interpreters that we pay for as well.
And then I'll just add most of like the volunteer interactions or just the day-to-day stuff that isn't like of huge importance is a lot of Google Translate or different translation apps. But Margaret's right, it's really fun because we have 18, we added it up, we have 18 languages spoken in our office because we have so many former refugees working at that.
We also all speak body language, and there's a lot you can actually communicate, drawing pictures. I mean, for like the less critical stuff, we have fun, do what we can.
Okay.
I want to remind audience members they can add questions, use the Q&A function, and submit questions.
All right, I got a handful more though. So why do some get chosen over others? Is there a particular thing that will stand out, or is it just a little more messy than that?
Do you want to take it, Kimmy?
Yeah. So I know that the determination to get refugee status is based off of not claim, that's not the right word, but the
vulnerabilities
and the fear of persecution, the well-founded fear of persecution. Okay. And so kind of just the worse they have it, the more likely they are to get that status. And so I mean, not always, but it's kind of like those who are here have been through a lot. And so because they don't give away refugee status very easily.
Right. So have a compelling story and be able to demonstrate that compelling story.
Yeah,
that's the advantage.
There are people who can't prove persecution that they're facing. So absolutely.
And there's some
have patience, right? It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. I mean, when I was a host family, we had a family from the Congo, and they were in a refugee camp in Tanzania for 17 years. The mom and dad, they had met there as teenagers, had all 6 of their kids there, and then by the time they came to stay with us, their oldest was, so they had met, gotten married, and had children all in a refugee camp. So 18 to 36 months is actually great, but the reality is that often it's more like decades sometimes.
Wow. Here's a question from the audience. Can you speak to refugees in our schools? How do they do?
That's a great question. We actually have a refugee youth tutoring program that we contract through Spokane Public Schools. So they send us referrals, and we have volunteer in-home tutors come to tutor them, not only in English language practice, but then also in school subjects. And so they get help from us in that way. And those aren't just the refugees that we're bringing. They're also refugees who have come through World Relief and have been here for a few years. So we have a lot of students we help that way. But they're doing well. I mean, they're working hard, and it's not, how well they're doing is not a reflection of it being easy. It's that they're just working so hard. We had a family, an Afghan family, who had an 8-year-old and then a 5-year-old, and they came and about 6 months ago, and they invited us over for dinner, and we went last month, and their daughter, who spoke 0 English, is now fluent. I mean, completely fluent. She was translating for her parents. She was talking full conversations with us. She's in 3rd grade. So she worked hard to get there, though. And so Spokane Public Schools has a really great ESL program. The teachers are so supportive and helpful. And so they do well. They have support, but that's not to say it's easy.
This is kind of a related question. How does the Spokane community overall accept refugees?
Kimmy can speak to this better than I can, since she's been here longer and been more involved. But I mean, since we've been open for a year, and it's been a very warm welcome. We've been overwhelmed with the interest in volunteering and people who just want to get involved and support the work. Our clients, yeah, we've not had any issues. I think generally they have felt welcomed, and I don't know, Kimmy, would you add?
I would agree with that. I mean, I think there's always pockets of people or places that may not be as giving as warm of a reception, but I think overall, generally, Spokane is a very welcoming community, and there's a lot of resources. There's a lot of people who want to help, and yeah, we haven't run into any problem or hesitation. Spokane's a great place to resettle with our school district, our hospitals. We have a lot of good stuff here, so including people. So it's been a very positive experience so far.
I have another audience question here. Do we get older Afghan girls who've had 0 education? Can they ever catch up? Maybe that's not limited to Afghan girls, but
Yeah, maybe it's to like high school students. Is that, or do you think that's where we're going? To maybe?
yeah, it sounds like older would be high school students.
Yeah, so we definitely get a good number of kind of older youth or young adults. So I think that's that 17 maybe to 20, 21 age group, and they are allowed to be in school, and anyone is allowed to be to go to school until they're 21. Often there's often times where, because of their age, and if they had their transcripts or don't have transcripts, they might not be on track to receive a diploma. And so when that's the case, there's counselors who are available and help kind of help the refugee understand their options, how to get a GED, and go to SCC, utilize the community college programs. We also have a very new mentorship program for that age group too, to help provide their support.
I think the question was about, and you mentioned Afghan girls. Well, if there were women who have come who had no formal education,
Mm,
weren't allowed to have education in the
mm,
countries they
okay.
lived in.
Yeah. So when I was at Fort Bliss during the Afghan evacuation, we saw quite a few women who, and it depends what province they're from in Afghanistan, or this could go for any country, but I mean, there's a range of like highly educated women to women who have never written their name. And so we definitely see both ends in Afghanistan, but other countries as well. But when I was at Fort Bliss, we had a few women, and they all, I would say, this was over a handful, maybe 10 to 20 women who had to sign their paperwork and had never like didn't know how to hold the pen, hadn't written their names, and it was. To me, it was one of the most heartwarming experiences to see their husband rubbing their back and their kids cheering them on, and them like scribbling down an attempt at their signature. And so yeah, we do have people come who have not had formal education, but they're excited to learn. They want opportunities, and they're resilient, and they go for these chances, and they take them. And so I catching up is hard to say. I mean, catching up to where others are, maybe not, maybe, but they're definitely pursuing opportunities when they come here. And but then on the other token, we have a lot of highly educated women who come here with multiple degrees and who were professionals, and so we see the whole spectrum.
All right. So you said some refugees are processed in, could be 18 months, some 36, some longer. What would be the difference between what aspect of their case would be different between someone who's, 18 months versus 36? Or is it just, many, many variables?
It's probably many variables, but depends on like the access. So one part of this screening process is in-person interviews. There's 3 distinct in-person interviews. So how remote are they? Like how hard is it to get there? How what kind of documentation do they have? So some populations might have like everything that could possibly be needed and required. Others have nothing. So how the U.S. the government kind of sifts and filters through that that definitely creates delays.
Okay.
And then too, like is the process interrupted by other conflicts? Like Margaret said earlier, there were refugees scheduled to, like in the middle of their process, scheduled to probably leave in 18 or 36 months or however long. But then with Afghanistan and Ukraine coming, we had that crisis in the humanitarian parolees coming, and so that delayed refugees coming through.
COVID. Yeah.
Yeah. COVID. Yeah.
Is there anything COVID can't break?
Do you provide services to the Afghan and Ukraine, what you call parolees? So are they part of your caseload?
We do. Yeah, they didn't come through our resettlement program. We weren't at the airport greeting them, but they've come through other pathways. And so now that they're here, we have programming, employment programming, case management, youth programming, health programs to support them, and some housing assistance as well, helping them find housing, and some rent assistance. So once they're so we actually they get about the same services as the kind of the refugees, the traditional refugees through our pathway. At this point, it wasn't initially. It was a total circuit. It was they were literally building the program, the Afghan program, as they're flying Afghans into the country. So it took a while, but we are able to serve them in kind of the same holistic ways we serve refugees.
So if there's 700 of the traditional refugees, in 2023 you expect in the country, how many of the parolee groups?
And so that was part of the Afghan Placement Assistance Program, the APA program, and so from August 20, can be like August 2021 to February 2022, that this is where we were receiving Afghan parolees into the community. And that was we weren't open at that. We were just opening. So I think we only resettled we only helped a handful, but through World Relief, through other ways, I think we had about just about 400 Afghans that came directly to Spokane. And then for the Ukrainians, it's a little bit of a harder number to get. I've heard anywhere from, and it's harder because they either came through U4U, which was easier to track, or they came across the southern border, totally independent. And so whether they've accessed, the only way we know if they're here is if they've accessed services. And so the estimates are anywhere from, I think like 1,200 individuals up to like 2,000. It's like a real wide range for the Ukrainians.
So those components are actually bigger than your typical mainstream refugee component.
Yes.
Okay, I got one more question from the audience. And you did discuss this a little bit. It said, did we discuss volunteers? What kind of volunteer opportunities are there and how many? I'm sure you don't mind repeating that.
Absolutely not. Kimmy, take it.
This is my favorite topic. I can talk about it all day. So yes, we always need volunteers. We will not turn volunteers away. There are a huge variety of volunteer opportunities. Like Margaret said, you can be a housing volunteer and kind of set up apartments, help collect donated items, gently used or new donated items, and then go set up and decorate the apartment yourself. We've had a couple groups do that and really ended up loving that experience and then bonding with the family afterwards. We have opportunities to be in-home women's access ESL tutors. A lot of times women don't sign up for the ESL classes that the community college offers because they're in person and they don't have childcare. And so that's a barrier for them to participate. And so in that case, we would send a one-on-one tutor to go in and work with the woman in her home on ESL. So that's an opportunity to volunteer. We have family mentors who go in the house and help with, anything from opening mail and reading bills in English to helping them set up online banking, helping them apply for internet, helping them look for jobs. We have volunteers that can come sort donations. We have volunteers that can teach. We teach you how to teach a job readiness training class, a cultural orientation. We have airport volunteers where you can go greet a family at the airport with us when they arrive. Really just a huge amount of opportunities. Yeah, youth tutors, that's one of our number one needs, are youth tutor volunteers. And then we can also kind of facilitate special projects because there are a lot of kids and teenagers who want to volunteer. And for our official volunteer opportunities, you have to be 18, but if you just want to do a one-time volunteer project, we can have youth participate in that, organizing a sock drive or making hygiene kits or just any number of things. We will find a way for anyone to help, and we are so happy to have the assistance.
Noted. What about like how to use social media tutors?
Yeah. We'll take the help. Go to Facebook, put in the search bar at IRC Spokane and help us through that.
Kind of kidding, but that would actually probably help them culturally integrate.
Yeah.
For better, for worse. What I was going to ask you, I really only have two basic questions, but they're sort of closing questions, but whatever, we'll see what other questions are out there. So, I'm always out with my friends at dinner parties or whatever, socializing. And some of my friends get into the more political and interesting, world politics stuff. And so the next time I'm with them, I would always want to lay something on them. Be like, so what would be the three things I would want to tell them that you guys think would be critical that I tell them about refugees? And I think I got two of them, but whatever. I want to hear what you guys would tell me to say at a dinner party, to become the life of the party.
Is the airplane ticket, right? Is the airplane ticket one?
That's one. Yeah. It's unreal.
I always, when I'm trying to get people on the side I think is the best side, which is welcoming refugees, I start with the practical. So I tell them about they're an investment. They we gain more than we spend on them. They bring culture, they bring talent, all of those things, but also instability in other nations affects our nation. And so from a geopolitical standpoint, it's imperative that we are helping to subdue these mass migration conflicts by inviting refugees into our country and helping out in these developing nations, because it's a lot. There's a lot happening, and it's growing exponentially, and so it's not realistic to think that we're isolated and that we can't that we don't need to be involved in other countries migration issues. And so that's just from a practical standpoint. From a personal standpoint, I would say that we need them just as much as they need us, and that we are better off for bringing them into our country and welcoming them with open arms. And it just helps us live up to our country's founding principles, and it's kind of our humanitarian obligation, but it also benefits us in the long run.
Got it. Sorry,
I would-
go ahead.
Oh,
Go
I
ahead,
was
sorry.
just going to add that the other fun fact is the hardest way to enter the U.S. is as a refugee.
Yeah.
Truly, truly.
I had that one. Yeah, that was kind of interesting. So what would I find wildly ironic among many things with a certain group of people in our country is on the one hand, they don't want refugees, and on the other hand, they don't want us to take any action internationally that would prevent refugees. I find
Right.
that rather incongruent and disconcerting and revolting. But yeah, it's the more engaged we are internationally, the more we can subdue people and lessen refugees. So great. All right, my last question, and I think you guys have answered it. What can we do as individuals to contribute to improving the refugee system? And it basically sounds like we need to yell at our congressmen, our elected officials more, and we can step in and actually do stuff directly to help out. So fabulous.
Yeah, agree.
You raised one last question for me, and it's just a curiosity. Are you seeing an increase in refugees or the people that come here who are traveling because of climate change?
Great question. Yes. That is a real thing. Climate refugees are definitely not made up, and there are millions of people who are forcibly displaced and as a result forced to migrate because of climate issues like drought, famine, severe weather patterns, and we're seeing that much more in a much more prevalent way than ever before. And IRC's work centers on helping that population of forced migrants as well.
That's only going to increase, it seems.
Yes.
So are we prepared for that increase?
No.
No, I've seen like some really eye-opening stats. Don't quote me on this, but I think by 2050 there could be over 1 billion people, that are forced to move because of climate. It's terrifying numbers.
You actually can quote her. It's
Is that right?
It's 100% accurate.
Oh, God, look at that memory.
It's a scary number.
Yeah, 1 billion.
It's a very scary number. Well, I hope that your work continues and prospers and grows. It's needed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Of course. So if that's Chris, no more questions?
I'm not seeing any audience questions beyond what we've asked.
Okay, I've asked all mine. I think we're good. I mean, I got to say, a lot of my questions were answered pretty efficiently by both of our speakers. So they were super thorough and insightful. I love these. I love our little sessions because it's always a level of detail that I would never know, but it's always interesting. So anyway, I'm just going to make our closing statement, and then we are out of here for tonight. So if you are finding these events helpful as you think about issues at the local, state, and federal level, please consider joining as a member or making a donation. On behalf of the PEG board membership, we wish to extend our gratitude to our two speakers tonight for your willingness to spend the evening with us and exploring these particularly challenging and painful but worthy topics. Thank you also to the audience. You are so much a part of the PEG work we do. A video of tonight's evening's forum will be posted on PEG's website in a couple of weeks. And lastly, there's a statement that I'm not seeing on my readout here, but the opinions and views expressed by our speakers do not necessarily represent those of PEG. I'm doing that just sort of off the cuff, so hopefully legally, if anyone has an issue, I've covered us. So anyway, that's it for tonight. Again, thank you both. Incredibly powerful and insightful. And hopefully, you know, we'll be able to bring you back in a while and see, catch up and find out what's the latest.
Love to come back. Thank you.
All right. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Have a good evening.
All
Have a
right.
great night.